So the next speaker is Commodore Michael Turner, CSM and Bar, RAN, who's the Director General Force Exploration in Force Design Division. Commodore Turner joined the Royal Australian Navy in 1989, graduating from the Australian Defence Force Academy with an electrical engineering degree. He conducted sea postings as a seaman officer and as a weapons electrical engineering officer, including command of the Anzac-class frigate HMAS Warramunga. He was the Capability Support Manager for the Anzac-class frigate and the Service Combatant Group Capability Managers Representative responsible for the Adelaide and the Anzac-class frigates and Hobart-class destroyers. Commodore Turner's operational service includes Operations Damask and Slipper, Combined Maritime Forces in Bahrain, CTF 150 staff and Director of Operations. He is a graduate of the Australian Commander Staff Course and the United Kingdom Royal College of Defence Studies. Would you please welcome Commodore Turner? Thank you.
Thanks, Paul, for the introduction. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all members of the Defence Reserve Association. My name is Commodore Mick Turner, and I work for the head of Force Design, Air Vice Marshal Steve Roberton, who was unable to make today's meeting, which is why I'm presenting on his behalf. I am Air Vice Marshal Roberton's Director General of Force Exploration within his Force Design Division. This rather elaborate branch head title is new and reflects the centrality of my role in exploring future force options to maintain and enhance our capability edge into the future. It is important to be agile and adaptive, responding to changing global and regional trends, technologies, and events in order to generate a future force capable of maintaining or increasing our advantage so as to shape our strategic environment, deter actions against our interests, and when required, respond with credible military force. A key element of this is a robust and agile defence mobilisation plan, which I'll speak about today. For those unfamiliar with force exploration, I'll briefly explain how we fit in the force design process before exploring the work we are undertaking within the mobilisation space and our key mobilisation deliverables over the coming years. Force exploration comes under the Vice Chief of the Defence Force, Vice Admiral Johnson, who is the Joint Force Authority, with responsibility for designing the future force and managing ADF preparedness on behalf of the Chief of Defence. We engage across defence, government, industry, and research institutions to get a broad range of ideas to support the development of concepts and mobilisation and preparedness planning outcomes to equip the future force to effectively confront a future operating environment of accelerated change and uncertainty. Force Exploration Branch has three broad objectives. Firstly, to understand the future operating environment and its impact on the joint force. Secondly, to provide credible pathways to compelling future force options through new concepts to achieve concept-driven force design. And thirdly, we develop, report and assure defence preparedness requirements and are presently developing and delivering a defence mobilisation plan to generate and sustain military advantage through informed force design. We scan for innovative technologies or search for ways to use existing technology different to explore what the future may hold. We do not rule out ideas that are seemingly unrealistic or unachievable today. Our focus is on 2030 and beyond, normally 20 years into the future, aiming to connect current capability to a force capable of operating in the future operating environment. Our work is fueled by ideas contributed by diverse thinkers. The design of the future force is also informed by an understanding of current and future defence preparedness requirements and defence mobilisation requirements, which also sits within my branch, and mobilisation will be the focus of the rest of my presentation. The 2020 Defence Strategic Update recognises that reduced warning times mean defence can no longer assume Australia will have time to make gradual adjustments to military capability and preparedness in response to emerging challenges. The update also refers to a need for defence to enhance its support to civil authorities in response to national and regional crises, including natural disasters. On the back of this update, the Force Structure Plan of 2020 called for the development of a defence mobilisation plan to increase the Australian Defence Force's ability to support a range of contingencies, including large-scale domestic natural disasters and national emergencies. The Defence Strategy 2020 supports the call for mobilisation plan by recognising the importance of defence working more closely with other elements of Australia's national power to achieve a defence mission. Achieving the direction in the Force Structure Plan to develop a mobilisation plan by 2023 is a significant body of work and a key focus of my branch. So what is strategic mobilisation for defence? Many of you may already have a view on what mobilisation is and how it is achieved. Many of you may have been involved in mobilisation at the tactical or operational levels during your time in the Defence Reserves. However, what I am here to discuss today is strategic mobilisation. We have provisionally defined strategic mobilisation as the act of generating additional capability and capacity beyond Defence's current scope and scale by changing defence resources. This could include adjusting the defence budget, redirecting workforce, or reallocating or repurposing defence and other government, commercial, or community resources to achieve government objectives. From this definition, it is apparent that strategic mobilisation is a whole-of-nation effort that cannot be achieved by the permanent Defence Force alone. Reserves are integral to our ability to strategically mobilise and will remain so into the future. So defence mobilisation in a national context. Defence has significant experience of mobilising at the tactical and operational level. Whilst these successes have informed how we operate and our training tactics and procedures, we should not be lulled into believing that we know mobilisation and that should a new, more complex threat or contingency eventuate, that we can carry on our core businesses and apply tried and tested mobilisation practices to resolving any new challenges and succeed. These processes have their place and experience is a valuable element of any mobilisation. However, when we look at contingencies which are far more complex than those we've experienced in recent decades, we need to be able to be ready to mobilise at scale and be prepared to do things differently. In order to respond successfully to such crises, our doctrine, our systems, legal frameworks, facilities, partnerships, and possibly even the capabilities that we now possess need to be revisited and updated to reflect emerging requirements. Strategic mobilisation is a whole-of-nation activity. Defence just plays one part in a wider whole-of-government approach that relies on the resources of a national support base. Strategic mobilisation is planning at a scale that we have not seen since World War II and may be required for large-scale or concurrent crises. As a national effort, Defence needs to understand the boundaries of our planning activities. Defence is one of many government agencies that is involved in large-scale crisis responses at the national level. With this in mind, we are developing a defence concept for strategic mobilisation and a defence strategic mobilisation framework and plan for the government that recognises Defence's role as a supporting element should the government wish to call on us. So what approach have we taken? Development of a defence strategic mobilisation plan follows a robust planning process common to defence and is a staged activity with key deliverables along the way. The first step was the development of strategic mobilisation scoping paper that was endorsed by the Chiefs of Service Committee in March 2021. This document articulates Defence's vision of strategic mobilisation and provides Defence with working definitions for strategic mobilisation and strategic mobilisation planning. The paper highlights 3 core elements and 10 critical factors relevant to strategic mobilisation planning. The 3 core elements are our national capabilities, the strength of the Australian economy, and the Australian community. While these sit beyond Defence's control or influence, their significance must be understood for robust planning processes. The 10 critical factors are recognised as areas for priority consideration in the development of our plan. And they include what capabilities we could require, coordination requirements, both internally to the department and external to the department, critical material, defence communication and culture, national infrastructure, national industry base, the legal framework in which we operate, partnerships, both internal and internationally, personnel considerations, and sustaining community support. These critical factors, and particularly Defence's place in them, need to be understood to develop a plan. The mobilisation team is currently finalising the Defence concept for strategic mobilisation. This concept will run through a series of tests and scenarios via experimentation. The concept will be refined through multiple rounds of experimentation, and this will guide and inform the development of the Defence Strategic Mobilisation Framework. The framework will articulate the core structures, coordination mechanisms, and key stakeholders, both internal and external to Defence, that will be necessary to manage the breadth and complexity of Defence strategic mobilisation requirements, regardless of scale. It will consider the 10 critical factors outlined in the scoping paper and the core elements. Defence has sought and will continue to seek broad perspectives and insights from government, industry and academia in the development of this framework. The Defence Strategic Mobilisation Guide will consolidate the findings arising from experimentation and wider defence exercises conducted by Headquarters Joint Operations Command to provide a conditions-based generic planning action guide for strategic mobilisation for a range of scenarios. We aim to have this completed by mid-2022. Once the draft framework and guide have been developed and drawing on the concept, Defence plans to engage with other government agencies and other key stakeholders to incorporate their perspectives before delivering a strategic mobilisation plan to government by mid-2023. So this slide gives a broader outline of what the core elements and critical factors are that inform our plan and our thinking. The 3 core elements and 10 critical factors illustrated here are identified in the Strategic Mobilisation Scoping Paper, which was endorsed in March 2021. As we progress the concept and it is tested against scenarios through experimentation, we will consider whether we have identified sufficient critical factors, or whether the ones that we have identified are actually critical after all. Already in the process of developing the concept, we have identified potential extra critical factors, which include such factors as intelligence, information and communications technology, data and knowledge management, and the role of science and technology. If we go to the next slide on strategic mobilisation. The former US Defense Secretary, General Mathis, aptly put, a concept should offer a departure from an existing doctrine and not merely an evolutionary enhancement to it. To be justified, a new concept should not merely provide value adds to existing doctrine, but should offer a new conceptual paradigm that stands as a clear alternative to existing doctrine. Accordingly, the purpose of our concept is to develop new ideas and new approaches to achieve strategic mobilisation. Oh, you've gone one too far. If you can go back. Yes, thank you. The concept is being prepared for endorsement by the Joint Warfare Council early in 2022 and aims to address the military problem identified in the Force Structure Plan of how to increase the Australian Defence Force's ability to support a range of scenarios, including concurrent or convergent events. The concept will be a dynamic document, subject to refinement and responsive to the outcomes of experimentation and the inevitable organisational changes that will occur over time. Experimentation will be an iterative activity of at least 4 testing regimes in the coming year, which are identified on the slide. What I'm highlighting is that it is a rigorous process that we are following that supports incorporation of outcomes through a process of test and review. I'm confident that where we start is almost certainly not where we're going to end up. Reserves, including their future use, composition, size, structure, roles and responsibilities, are important elements of the concept and I expect ultimately the plan. Employees of reserves are also important stakeholders who must be taken into account in the context of a national mobilisation effort to ensure our human capital is optimised to support mobilisation outcomes, either by reserves being in uniform or potentially remaining with their employer, prioritised according to need. We intend to invite external stakeholders to these experimentation activities, starting with Defence, Reserve and other Commonwealth Department representatives at our first activity in a few weeks' time. And we will slowly broaden the invite list as the concept matures and subsequent experimentation occurs. It is important to note that concepts encourage us to develop new ideas. The outcome of a concept are not always adopted, but can act as a driver of change. Go to the next slide, please. As touched on earlier, the Defence Strategic Mobilisation Framework is another artefact that my team is developing. The framework will detail the system by which strategic mobilisation can occur, including roles, accountabilities, responsibilities, and coordination mechanisms. The framework is being designed to cover the broadest range of contingencies that we may face now and into the future. It will define key relationships, both internal and external to defence, with all levels of government, industries and businesses, non-government organisations, state emergency services, community groups, and other sectors of Australian society. An understanding of these relationships and how they function will enable the framework to be embedded in a whole of government and a whole of nation context. This framework is not designed to duplicate or replace other government crisis management frameworks, but it gives government an assurance that defence has a well-articulated process to prepare for and, if required, implement strategic mobilisation. The core deliverables to government is the mobilisation plan itself. This document will draw on the concept and framework documents and, by addressing each critical factor, determine what can be done by defence to strengthen strategic mobilisation options. Elements of the plan are likely to include better utilisation of the reserve workforce and investment choices that may provide capacity and capability to support mobilisation. It will also aim to identify for government what external coordination, engagement and capability related activities are beyond the ability of defence to complete or are better suited for defence to support another government agency. Next slide, please. Strategic mobilisation planning, by its very nature, requires engagement external to defence to explore a range of coordination, personnel, industry, infrastructure, legislative, economic and community issues. The use of think tanks and academia ensures that interrelated activities of concept development, preparedness management and mobilisation planning are able to benefit from the expertise of a range of diverse subject matter experts to facilitate the generation of robust and well-considered products. Defence has sponsored and attended multiple activities and workshops on a range of significant mobilisation topics in recent months. The National Security College at the Australian National University has hosted workshops sponsored by Defence on key topics such as critical infrastructure and national preparedness. These workshops enable discussion of strategic mobilisation issues among government-related stakeholders to identify the roles and responsibilities each could have in preparing for or responding to a large-scale contingency within a national context. These are also very instructive for defence, facilitating greater understanding of the expectations of other agencies may have of defence and our role within government in supporting strategic mobilisation. The workshops made it clear that many attendees believe defence has a key role to serve in preparing for crisis responses through its robust planning processes and ability to execute effective wargaming or exercising against different scenarios in support of broader government crisis planning and coordination. They also provided great insights into what other areas of government were doing in terms of mobilisation, nation building and national resilience. It identified current mechanisms of practices which have been implemented across the Parliament in response to recent crises and recommendations for lessons learned from these crises. It also outlined and identified key stakeholder and established relationships with other government departments to assist us in developing our plan. Next slide, please. The Directorate has sponsored a number of academic studies and reviews through multiple Australian universities and think tanks. The topics that we have so far put out there to develop these artefacts are listed on this slide. Now, some of these studies are still ongoing, but I'll quickly draw on two studies which are now complete, they being the RAND study and the social cohesion study undertaken by the Australian National University. Next slide. So the RAND study was delivered a few months ago, and it was based on a comparative study across 5 other nations, including the United States, Switzerland, Sweden, Finland, and Singapore. RAND made a number of recommendations which are on this slide. I should note that these recommendations have informed our thinking, but this does not mean they will formally be adopted. It just means that they are helping in our understanding of the challenges ahead. Next slide, please. We also conducted a study through ANU on social cohesion. Next slide, please. Through Australian National University. What this study identified, and there's some of the key central themes are here on this slide, is that the conclusions they have drawn extend way beyond defence and our mobilisation requirements and represent social cohesion observations for any significant national contingency, but they remain relevant to a contingency which would require mobilisation. Next slide, please. I just want to now quickly highlight where we have a role for reserves in our process. I mentioned earlier the critical factors. We have established a series of critical factor coordinators. These have been drawn from 1-star and colonel equivalent reservists, and they have an important role in acting as an advisory capacity to me and my team. Their subject matter expertise is drawn from their military reserve experience and in many cases from their extensive commercial experience. They're assisting us developing all the artefacts and will also participate in all our experimentation activities. And final slide, please. While I have spoken about a range of key stakeholders, we have been engaging to aid us in the development of our deliverables. The Defence Reserve Association is also a key stakeholder, and we would appreciate your input to aid in the development of our deliverables and participation in our activities. If you are interested in becoming a critical factor coordinator or contributing to the defence concept for strategic mobilisation or any of our deliverables, please contact my team on the email address shown on this slide. Submissions for the first draft of the concept, which we're about to experiment, close in a few weeks' time, and they will further inform the concept prior to experimentation and final approval. However, we are more than happy to take submissions after this date. And many of the submissions that we have received have actually been from reserves. I am also considering bringing in external stakeholders such as the Defence Reserve Association into a mobilisation steering group to provide external perspectives and to highlight reserve equities as our products mature and we move towards the final plan. I apologise for the few technical glitches along the way, but thank you for allowing me to speak today.